Good evening, haunters. Welcome to the first episode of Holiday Horrors. In tonight's episode, we try to understand the lonely ones, the ones who have nobody to talk to, no friends, just the job. But sometimes, the lonely bring the job home to keep them company. Enjoy. Slender fingers reached for the glass eyes. Her mind focused as she looked for the perfect color. She smiled as she picked a particular shade, a bright mossy one. Gently, she pressed it in the little lovely's empty eye socket, humming to the classical music that played softly in the background. It shined perfectly with the rosiness of her skin, making her smile widen as she reached for the matching pair. For days she had worked on the delicate porcelain features, adding creases to the toes and fingers, dimples to the cheeks, moles and freckles to her little face, and a yellow sundress with white church shoes. She was definitely a masterpiece, one of the greatest little lovelies she had ever sculpted.
I'll call you Sheena.
Carefully, she picked up the Irish doll and sat her alongside Terrence, her dark-skinned brother. With soft curly hair, big hazel eyes, and dimpled cheeks, her little African-American welcomed his new sister with a smile. Her yellow dress and white skin really made a contrast on the shelf next to him, making his color stand out even more than before. It was the same reason he had his little sister beside him. Dressed in a powder pink receiving blanket was little Soo Yoon, her little Korean lovely with soft brown eyes. So many dolls of so many ethnicities. She was proud of her work. So very, very proud. With a satisfied sigh, Tina turned off the radio and stretched, knowing that she had once again gotten carried away. Sure enough, a glance at the clock revealed that it was far past her bedtime. She was due for the morning shift at the hospital in just a few hours. Tiredly, she turned off her light and prepared herself for bed, feeling exhaustion creeping in as she made her way to her room. As her hand reached up to grab the doorknob, a heavy thump from downstairs echoed through the house and made her jump in fright. She immediately put a hand over her mouth, eyes wide and terrified as she softly pattered over to the railing. She prayed that no one had broken in, but a look down the stairs nearly made her scream. Standing at the bottom was a figure dressed in a black robe, their hood blocking their face from view. Whoever they were, their head was raised to the balcony, looking at the room she had just left. They didn't seem to notice her. Heart pounding, she took a step back, her body tense as her thoughts ran to where her cell phone was, before her eyes widened with a sickening horror as she realized something. The person she was staring at, she was also staring through. Just as she thought it, the being vanished right before her eyes. That was the first time she saw it. The continuous ticking of the clock echoed through the silent house, the only noise to keep her company as she lay awake, staring with dread at her closed door. It was a little after 4 in the morning and a noise had echoed through the house from downstairs, a noise that she had become unfortunately familiar with the past few months. Even locked in her room, Tina could feel the presence of the being in her house, the figure cloaked in darkness that stood at the bottom of the stairs just staring at her doll room. Tina clutched at her blanket with trembling lips, chewing absent-mindedly as she stared hard at the door. She had to go to the bathroom, but was too reluctant to move. Even though the being had never moved, had never even looked her way, it still terrified her. She wished she could just close her eyes and go back to sleep, but she couldn't. She never could with that thing downstairs. Sighing, Tina mustered up her courage and slipped out of bed, cautiously making her way to the door, Her trembling hands gently opened it, letting her peer out into the darkness to make sure it hadn't moved. A breath she didn't know she held was released as she saw nothing but the banister, and a quick peek down revealed that it was still standing there, looking at her dial room. Just looking at it made her bladder almost release, making her quickly clench to avoid an embarrassing accident. She'd had enough of those the past few months to last her a lifetime. Quietly, she drew back from the banister and made her way to the bathroom, relieved that nothing had changed, when she felt the softest of brushes against her neck that made her freeze in fright. A sharp gasp escaped her lips as her fight or flight reflexes kicked in. It wasn't even a real choice. She ran so fast she didn't even realize she was in the bathroom until she slammed the door. Her legs wet with the urine as her bladder gave up the fight. Heart pounding, she leaned her ear up against the door and listened for any movement. A shudder passed through her body as she waited, but there was nothing else. Had she imagined it? Was her fear getting out of hand? With a stuttered breath, Tina looked down at herself, ashamed at her weakness. She was losing her mind. She was too old to be scaring herself to such a level of shame. If her friends only knew. With a weak chuckle, Tina cleaned herself up, her dirty clothes going into the hamper as she wrapped herself in a towel. She didn't want to go back out there, but she took a deep breath and cracked open the door, looking for anything amiss. There was nothing. With a bowed head, she crept out of the door and out into the hallway, unable to stop herself from peering down the stairs again. Sure enough, the shadowy figure still stood there, staring at the same spot. No. Tina's eyes widened. It had moved. No longer at the bottom of the stairs, it had gone up a step, still looking at the dial room. Tina's heart pounded in her ears as she clutched at her throat, stopping a terrified scream before it could come. What was it? What did it want? Why was it there? Go away! She shouted, unable to stop herself from speaking. Please, just leave me alone! The spirit suddenly turned and looked at her, making her bolt into a room and lock the door behind her. A shaky sob tore from her throat as she threw herself on her bed, unable to turn away from the door. She waited and waited and waited for something to happen again. Would it walk up the steps, pound on her door, call her name? Tina blinked and gasped, surprised to see the sun shining in the room. A quick glance at the clock revealed it to be after 7 in the morning. Exhaustion must have crept in and put her to sleep without her realizing it. Shakily she stood and made her way to the door, twisting the knob and peering out of it with trepidation. Once she saw nothing was amiss, she hurried to get herself together for work. Her constant tardiness was for sure going to get her fired soon. She made sure to grab her brown leather bag before she left. It was only as she closed up the house did a chill suddenly go down her spine, as she realized that she had opened her bedroom door without unlocking it first. The security company alerted us, ma'am. Officer Stanley was walking through the house with a flashlight, checking every nook and cranny before heading upstairs. Tina couldn't help but get nervous with every step he took. They tried to contact you, but you didn't answer. The door was unlocked.
Thanks, officer.
The frightened woman stammered as she walked behind him, her heart pumping with dread. As they traveled through each room, she confirmed that nothing was missing. Everything was actually perfect. Her lovelies were still in their positions, not a single thread out of place. Aside from the unlocked door, nothing was wrong. The officers left her with the friendly warning to lock her doors and call them at the first sign of anything strange, leaving her behind in her silent and haunted house, her back against the door. It took a long moment for her to gather enough strength to look up at the empty stairs, to look towards the middle, where the being had currently reached in his nightly haunts. Every day it drew closer and closer to the top. She had tried to sleep on the couch once and woke up to it staring at her from the bottom of the stairs. She never did it again. This was the first time, however, that it had done something in the daytime, had managed to activate her home security even. It was both relieving and disheartening. She had thought that she was just imagining the being. She had hoped that she was just imagining the being.
Tina inhaled. I'm leaving!
Suddenly furious, she turned and disabled her alarm system.
You can't stop me!
She grabbed her leather bag and looked at the empty steps again, trying to convince herself that she was not going crazy.
I'm not staying!
A shrill beep began echoing throughout the house, scaring her so bad she nearly pissed herself. It took her terrified mind far too long to realize it was her smoke detectors, all of them shrilling at the same time for no reason at all. Then the lights turned on, the radio, the television. Her blender blared to life in the kitchen. She was already halfway out the door when something broke behind her, a familiar sound echoing through the house as strong fingers gripped her hair and yanked her backwards. For a moment she flew, before she crumbled in pain as she hit the steps hard, the door slamming and locking right before her eyes. A burst of adrenaline rushed through her as footsteps sounded, making her brush off the pain and run up the stairs. For the first time since the thing had started haunting her, she slammed and locked the door in the daytime, heart pounding and body aching. The house fell silent. Breathing heavily, Tina put her ear up to the door. The smoke alarms and blender had stopped, leaving only the sound of footsteps slowly making their way up the stairs. There was a low feminine laugh, then the slow walking suddenly turned to running, making Tina rear back as she heard it bypass her door. Her heart sank as she heard another door slam, a door that was far too close to the direction of her doll room. Certainly it wouldn't have. No, this was too much. Haunting her, destroying her house, setting off her alarms, she could care less about. But nobody messed with her dolls. With renewed determination, Tina gripped her bag and unlocked the door, swinging it open with a scowl on her face. The scowl that quickly turned to horror as a pair of dead eyes stared at her. It was a trick, a cruel, sick joke to get her to open her door. She took a startled step back and slammed it closed immediately. It slammed back open.
Get away from me,
Tina cried, taking a step back as the being took a step forward. Then another. Another. With a terrified scream, Tina threw her bag at it and ran past it, but was stopped cold. She stopped so fast she lost her breath, her feet floating off the floor as she was slowly turned around to face the creature of her nightmares. To her surprise, it was her. The face, the eyes, the lips, dressed in all black, with his body decaying and lifeless. She stared at the broken image of herself. The spirit whispered. Right after the words, the being disappeared, leaving Tina to thump painfully to the floor.
I can't escape me,
she repeated, a sick pit in her gut. Heart pounding, it took her a moment to gather enough strength to move, and she wasted no time. She snatched her leather bag from the stairs as she ran out of the house, not even bothering to look behind her. She knew it was still there, still watching her, but at least this time it let her go. It must have known that she would come back. She couldn't leave her lovely fat monster's hands. Outside, Tina ran. She ran and she ran, the streets bypassing her in a blur. She didn't know where she was running to, where to go. She just ran until her body couldn't take it anymore. Digging into her bag reduced her phone, and she called the first person she could think of, her best friend, but she can only reach the voicemail.
Hey, it's Mickey. I can't pick up, but you know what to do.
Hey, Mickey. It's Tina. I really need your help right now. Please pick up.
Her voice cracked.
Please.
She lowered her head, her eyes wet with tears. Of all the times.
Mickey, no matter what time you receive this message, call me back, okay?
She hung up and stared blankly at her phone, trying to remember the names and numbers of any of her other friends. But for the life of her, the only person she could remember was Mickey. With a despondent sigh, Tina picked up her bag and began to aimlessly walk. Her brows furrowed as she finally paid attention to her surroundings. How long had she been outside? The sky was dark when she was sure that it was just sunny, and the people around her were out of focus. Not one person looked real. It was like she was looking at static. Spooked, Tina turned her focus to the buildings, hoping to see anything familiar, and stopped cold. Somehow, she was standing right back in front of her house. Forlornly, she stared at her door, her heart dropping at the view. No way. She was sure she had run far and wide. There was no way she had gotten turned around. Desperation made her go for her phone again, her fingers shaking as she dialed the only number she knew.
Hey, it's Mickey. I can't pick up, but you know what to do.
Mickey, it's me again. Please answer. Please.
Tina hung up the phone and looked up, wondering when she had moved to the house. She was standing at the door now. She didn't have a choice, did she? The door opened with no resistance, letting her cautiously walk in, expecting the worst. But nothing happened. All was quiet. Her shoulders sagging, Tina walked through the house to make sure everything was okay, ensuring to turn on every light on her way through. Finally, she made it to her doll room, regretting in her heart that she had left them alone with that other her. She opened the door, hoping that they weren't damaged in any way, and gasped with fright. Standing in the middle of the room, the spirit glared at her, dead eyes full of hatred. She screamed. It screamed. Arms thrown wide, the specter ran at her, making her close her eyes as it barreled through her. She waited for something to happen with terror in her heart, her body shuddering as she heard a small whimper, and then a cry. Tina opened her eyes with shock. She knew that sound. Sure enough, instead of her doll room, she stood in a familiar nursery. A nursery that was full of nothing but terrible memories. The babies were all screaming now, all except for one. As if hot water was thrown on her, Tina drew away from it. Memory after memory came rushing back at her, making her hysterically laugh as the door opened. She didn't need to see it. She didn't need to see herself find her daughter.
No!
Screaming, Tina turned and ran through the open door, stumbling into another brightly lit room, another nursery, this time a familiar hospital. Over a dozen babies in incubators screamed at the top of their lungs at the sight of her. Incessantly and non-stop, the little ones wailed and wailed and wailed. Sins and misdeeds flashed before her eyes as live babies became dead babies. Suffocated, snatched, stolen. One by one, their lives were ended. Their little bodies carried in a brown leather bag. So many ethnicities, so many lovelies. She had to preserve them all because she had lost her own. A clip of the flesh, a scoop of an eye, clothes, toys, They looked so perfect on her walls. Little boys and little girls, her children, her babies forever. Tina shook her head in denial, even as she clutched at her heavy brown leather bag, her body shaking as she ran to another door. This one led to her darkened home. Tina turned on the light. Her eyes greeted to missing children's posters littering the walls, newspapers with interviews of grieving families stacked like trophies on the tables. Dolls were scattered around, greeting her, their faces beaming at her return. Her curtains were dark and always drawn, ensuring that no one could peer inside, could see her for what she truly was, a death dealer, evil in its rawest form, a killer of innocence, all under the guise of a kind nurse. She had been snatching and killing babies for years now. She had perfected the art. She even learned how to make a death look natural. No one suspected her. She was perfect. Her friends never visited her house anymore, not after the tragic incident. People just accepted her quirks as mourning. Her hands trembled as she gripped at her heavy bag. No one ever suspected her, but she had a feeling that that was about to change. She got greedy and took 2 babies instead of 1, a pair of little lovely Irish children that she just couldn't pass up. She had never seen such a stunning head of red hair, such a beautiful shade of green eyes. She had to have them. Now the hospital was being investigated. The police were questioning and interviewing the staff. Who knew how long it would take for them to look her way? To get a warrant to check her house. She had to do some cleaning and hide the evidence, to hide the horrible deeds she had done. Gently, she put the heavy bag down and began to work. The newspapers and posters were bound together and placed into a box in an empty storage room, a lock placed on it that she ensured she would pretend to lose the key for. Her lovelies were picked up, one by one, going into the same upstairs area, propped and posed to look like a regular room. She hated to confine them to one space, but it would only be for a short time, just until the police finished their investigation. Tina ensured to clean her house with bleach. She would also need to wash her rugs later, and her bag. And speaking of, with a smile, Tina made her way over to the blood-soaked bag, feeling giddy as she peered inside. She felt guilty that she had to hide the bag away from the house for the day, but she was grateful that nobody found it. Now she could finally start adding the twins to her collection. She had to do it soon. She put the brother in the freezer to stop his decomposing, then took the little girl upstairs to her new doll room. It took a few days to get everything the way she wanted it to look. A clock in the room, a radio, a proper table, antique tools, little outfits and eyes all placed where she could easily reach them. Indeed, Tina felt quite proud of herself. Humming, classical music playing in the background, her slender fingers reached for the glass eyes. Her mind focused as she looked for the perfect color. She wanted a green one, that particular shade that she had seen the mother have, a nice mossy color. She smiled as she pressed it in the little lovely's empty eye socket. It shined perfectly with the rosiness of her skin, making her smile widen as she reached for the matching pair. It may have taken her a few days to work on the delicate porcelain features, but she was proud of her work. Creases and dimples, moles and freckles, a yellow sundress and white church shoes. This little lovely was definitely a masterpiece. More than likely, she would be the only little girl she could work on until the investigation cooled. Tina intended to do her best with the twin boy as well. They would be the greatest little lovely she had ever sculpted.
I'll call you Sheena.
Carefully, she picked up the Irish doll and sat her alongside Terrence, her dark-skinned brother. With soft curly hair, big hazel eyes, and dimpled cheeks, her little African-American welcomed his new sister with a smile. Her yellow dress and white skin really made a contrast on the shelf next to him. making his color stand out even more than before. It was the same reason he had his little sister beside him. Dressed in a powder pink receiving blanket was little Soo Yoon, her little Korean lovely with soft brown eyes. So many dolls of so many ethnicities. She was proud of her work. So very, very proud. With a satisfied sigh, Tina turned off the radio and stretched, knowing that she had once again gotten carried away. Sure enough, a glance at the clock revealed that it was far past her bedtime. She was due for the morning shift at the hospital in just a few hours. She needed to be on her best behavior to make sure she wasn't the least bit suspicious during the investigation. Tiredly, Tina turned off her light and prepared herself for bed, feeling exhaustion creeping in as she made her way to her room. As her hand reached up to grab the doorknob, a heavy thump from downstairs echoed through the house and made her jump in fright. She immediately put a hand over her mouth, eyes wide and terrified as she softly padded over to the railing. She prayed that no one had broken in, but a look down the stairs nearly made her scream. Standing at the bottom was a figure dressed in a black robe, their hood blocking their face from view. Whoever they were, their head was raised to the balcony, looking at the room she had just left. They didn't seem to notice her. Heart pounding, she took a step back, her body tense as her thoughts ran to where her cell phone was, before her eyes widened with the sickened horror as she realized something. The person she was staring at, she was also staring through. That was the first time she saw it. The guilt, the horror of her own subconsciousness pouring into her home in its lifeless form. It turned its head to her, deadened familiar colored eyes locking her into place. In a burst of memories, Tina recalled what she was doing. She had been caught by the spirit, trapped into reliving her life. Trapped in a feeling of faint hints of guilt and horror that she pretended she didn't have anymore. She had to run. She had to get away. Turning, Tina froze in fright as she was greeted with herself, the spirit glaring at her with all of the hate she had buried inside. She hissed, arms reaching out to push at the frozen woman. Tina tilted backwards, her arms pinwheeling as she tried in vain to stop her fall. Then, there was pain. Tina opened eyes she wasn't aware of closing, bright lights greeting her vision. She recognized the room she was in right away, the familiar dolls lining the walls, smiling at her as she lay lifelessly on the table. Horror immediately filled her insides as she tried to move, but no matter how much she struggled, her body remained still. The door opened. In he came carrying her brown leather bag, a frown on his face as he made his way to her paralyzed form. She recognized him right away, her stomach dropping as he stood before her and smiled. It was Mickey, her best friend, the only person that ever understood her. She tried to call out to him, but her vocals refused to work, and he couldn't see the terror in her eyes as he gently touched her face.
You're going to be beautiful.
Carefully, the sculptor worked on her. He started with cutting her open and removing her innards, just like she taught him. He was unable to hear her screams. For days he worked on her, adding creases to her toes and fingers, molds of birthmarks to her skin, eyes to her face, and a modest blue dress on her body. She was definitely a masterpiece, one of the greatest ladies he had ever sculpted. He smiled and picked her up, unaware of the haunted eyes staring back at him. His missing mentor, her soul forever trapped inside a porcelain prison. How he missed her.
I'll call you Tina.
Poor, lonely Tina, so heartbroken over the loss of her newborn daughter that she decided to take drastic measures to end her grief. Never again wanting to feel the loss of a child, but wound up losing herself in the end. Good night, haunters. Until the next holiday.